He is going for broke. Drew Pearson. He got it. Touchdown.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Now About Them Cowboys. No, I am not Coach Sheps. Obviously, I'm filling in for Coach Sheps, who's taking some time off with the family to, I think, do some family activities, sports-wise. I am Joe Knows. I'm another contributor here at Toilets to Titles, and I'm filling in for the great coach as best as I can. But I've got the best co-host in the world, big-time Cowboys fan. You know him and love him. You know him as Andrew Campey. Mr. Campey, good morning for me. Good evening for you. How are you, my friend?
Yeah, look, not too bad. It's number 13 of our episodes, so I don't know if that's good or bad, but I guess we'll find out as we go on. But I guess
I like that number.
Well, people would know you from the T2T network and obviously from a previous episode of the Now About Them Cowboys, but you are a Giants fan, and we'll let it slide for tonight because we did need a co-host and you stepped in.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
That's true. I do have a Giants content show over here Wednesday nights, and I wasn't going to bring it up at all because I do, when I come on, I do a Cowboys show or another show for another team. I am professional, and that's it. And I do want to say that I have a lot of respect for the Cowboys. So the NFL would not be the same without the Dallas Cowboys. It's like the same thing in baseball. Baseball would not be the same without the New York Yankees. Football would not be the same without the NFL. Cowboys, I don't dislike the Cowboys. The only team I dislike are the Eagles. So hopefully we can get on board with that. Because they always kick my team's butt. So anyway, what we are going to do today, we're going to talk about, as you see in the banner down below, we're going to talk about the top NFL East storylines in 2023. We're going to cover the NFC Beast. And I do think, Andrew, it's a beast of a division at this point. And everyone's talking about the AFC East, rightfully so. But our division, I think our division has leveled up across the board this year. And I'm really dying to talk about that. So we're going to talk about, I believe, the Eagles first, and then the Giants, and then the Commanders. And of course, we're going to finish it off with our Dallas Cowboys. Before we do that, let me get the bells and whistles out of the way as quickly as I can. Please, if you can, hit that like button, subscribe, give us that 5-star Apple review. It helps us a lot. Where you can find our content: Apple Podcast, YouTube, Facebook, Podbean, Spotify. We're all over the place. ToiletsToTitles.com, our beautiful, wonderful website, which was created and started by our wonderful Andrew Campey. He's the magic man behind the scenes, and he's taught me quite a bit where I can go in and make some things happen. But I'm not at the sorcery level that this man is at. I haven't leveled up that far yet. And but if you go there, it has all of our videos, articles. We cover everything to do with football, college football, NFL football. Fantasy football was our original bread and butter. We still obviously are really big into fantasy football and the NFL draft. I just want to say, if you didn't watch us, if you didn't follow the NFL draft and Toilets to Titles this past draft, you want to do it in 2024. Because we had boots on the ground at Senior Bowl, at the Combine. We even had boots on the ground at the draft, and we were actually getting the picks like a minute before they were announced, and we were giving that information out because of our boots on the ground, our hard workers here at Toilets to Titles and the CFB Nation. And speaking of the CFB Nation, and I just want to make a distinction. I think it's very important. For whatever reason, it's morning over here in New Jersey, but it looks dark in my living room. We have partnered with at the CFB Nation, and there is another content creator out there called CFB Nation. They are imposters. You want to follow the CFB Nation. They and Toilets to Titles together, we make up T2T Network. The CFB Nation is fantastic. They do a great job of covering everything to do with college football. Once those players start entering the draft, Toilets of Titles takes over. So, like I said, from beginning to end, football, 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 we got it covered. Also, patreon.com/Toilets of Titles. If you go there, you can learn how you can further support the show. And I want to say thank you. We want to say thank you to our current Patreon supporters. We appreciate you appreciating us. And last but not least, Gilded. We have our own chat in Gilded, the app Gilded. And there's like 125, 135 of us in there so far. It's growing all the time. We have a great time talking football. And whatever you want to talk about with football, there's always going to be conversations going on. You have any questions, especially in season with fantasy football? You're looking for advice, you can come in, ask questions. You're going to get, our chat is loaded with fantasy football experts. So I'm not really one of them. I'm not too bad, but I do like to be humble. It's a false humble, the false humble that everyone hates. No, I'm not bad, but there are real pros in there who just come on in. They will give, you'll get feedback all over the place and reasons behind the decisions that they're offering you. And all you have to do is, hit me up, hit Andrew up, hit up at Toilets of Titles on Twitter. And we'll get you in. We'll get you in. So those are the bells and whistles. They grow longer and longer every time. I remember when I first started here like 2 years ago, I think there were 3 announcements to make. Now it takes like 5 minutes to get through them. But anyway, let's start off with the Philadelphia Eagles. And Andrew, I had said earlier that, and of course it's fine to disagree with me. I know Coach is cool with it. I only give one demerit for disagreeing with me, so it's not that bad. But I said earlier, just to lead off the show, that I think our division, the NFC East, improved across the board actually this offseason. Whether it was free agency, draft, I really like what each team did. And just to point something out too, that people sleep on the Washington Commanders, understandably so. They've been kind of like a definition of mediocrity for a long time, and I'm not trying to embarrass them or stomp on them. It's just been the truth. But even that team that came in last place in the division last year, they finished 8-1 without really a quarterback. So that was the last place team in our division. That's pretty damn good. What are your feelings on the division, last year into this year? Do you agree with me that across the board, not that every team necessarily leveled up the same, but do you think, teams are stagnant? What are your feelings overall?
No, well, like it's incredible when you think, like, literally it was probably 2 years ago that the running joke was it was the NFC least.
Yeah,
because
right.
they were everyone was looking at these teams thinking there was nothing there and they were going nowhere. And then, as you said, you look at it now and you sit there and you think, geez, Philadelphia could be anything. And then you look at the Cowboys and, they could be anything. And then on top of that, and we're going to talk about it, so we don't want to get too much into what we're going to discuss shortly. But, the Giants are obviously a team that, a new coach has come in and revitalized the whole organization. Yeah. And then, as you said, like, we've got Washington as well, who, when you're talking about the poorest team in the division being still a 500 team, there are so many divisions out there who would love to be in the situation of the NFC East. So it's amazing how quickly things can turn in football.
Yeah, great point. I forgot about that. It was just 2 seasons ago or was it 2 or 3 seasons ago where, I guess it was 2 seasons ago, where we had a team win the division at like 6-10, when it was still a 16-game season. Like, and I knew even back then, I mean, I think Dallas was riddled with injuries. Dak had gone down. And I knew Philadelphia was like kind of like in a transition period at that time. I'm like, this division's is not, at least with the Cowboys and the Eagles, I'm like, this division's not going to be like this for too much longer. I think 2 years ago was an anomaly. And the Giants stunk and Washington stunk, but I'm like, I knew Dallas was good as long as Dak had been healthy. They would have been obviously much better. And then Philadelphia, I'm like, I like the way the team was transitioning even at that time, away from the Carson Wentz years.
And that the running joke is the NFL stands for not for long. And you look at it and go, 12 months ago, we were having this discussion about whether or not Philly should be looking at a new quarterback. And you stare and go, they were making strong inroads to try and get a new quarterback 12 months ago. And you think they could have got that quarterback. And then all of a sudden we're sitting there having this complete conversation about some quarterback who, the strong word was that they were trying to get Russell Wilson 12 months ago. And you think, geez, if you put Russell Wilson in that team, do they do better? I don't think anyone would say they would. And you look at it and go, they've lucked out in a way to get Hurts, but that's the way that football rolls, isn't it? Really, it's just you can't sit there and say 2 years ago this team was doing this. And there are some teams, the Patriots dynasty, obviously, that managed to roll for a long time, but in the NFL,
So
anything
hard.
can change within 12 months, 18 months. Look at Detroit is a good example of someone who's been a laughing stock for so long, and all of a sudden they get a new coach and a few players, and all of a sudden, probably incorrectly, people are talking about them going deep into the playoffs. But it's amazing how quickly things can change in 12 months.
Yeah. Well, I can't say it's really changed quickly for the Lions because they stunk for like 60 years. So it's like been 60 years in the making. But I hear what you're saying, and I'm really high on the Lions. I won't go there too long. I won't go on a tangent, but I am high on the Lions. Probably, like you said, probably not as high as some others, not for this year. But I do think they're going to have a good season. But yeah, man, Jalen Hurts, like that was, and we're going to lead off for the Eagles right now. But just to segue into that, Jalen Hurts, I like 2 years ago, I'm like, just stick with Jalen Hurts. Before even Eagles fans, not all of them, but a lot of them wanted to move on, and they're like, I guess we have to take a quarterback now. And I was thinking, give Jalen Hurts a shot. Unless you're like, pick a number one for a quarterback, give Jalen Hurts a shot. And then unfortunately they did, and it turned out really, really well. But listen, I kind of have feelings about Sam Howell. I'm not saying he's going to be Hurts. We'll get there. I'm just giving a little teaser there. I'm a Howell defender, and we'll get to that in a little bit. So let's start off with the last year's NFC East divisional champions, the Eagles, who made it to the Super Bowl, unsurprisingly. I actually was surprised when they lost that Super Bowl because, listen, you can never discount the Chiefs team was good. You can never discount a team that's got a great head coach and a great, probably it's got to be the best quarterback today. When you have that combination, you can never count a team out. But I thought on paper that Philadelphia was significantly better than Kansas City. And I didn't think that game was going to be even close. I was wrong. The Eagles, I think, like I said earlier, I think every team, actually, even the Eagles, improved this offseason. The question, how far can the Eagles go? I mean, really, if you're going to go further, it's winning the Super Bowl. And I fully believe they are still the cream of the crop in the NFC, the entire conference. How do you feel about the Eagles? Their offseason, you think they've improved, stayed the same?
No, look, I mean, it's one of those things, isn't it? Like, I think if you look at last year's Super Bowl, and, I might be wrong here, but it really feels like the Chiefs were a descending team and the Eagles were an ascending team. And, then the Eagles come along and they've got 2 first-round picks. And, whether or not they should have ended up getting those those 2 picks in the first round, probably, we could have long conversations about, the trades that went on and whether or not they were valid trades or whatever. But, like, what annoys me as a fan of the Cowboys is how good the Eagles are at not only maximizing their salary cap, but maximizing their trade value as well. And so, it feels like they were an ascending team last year, and then they're coming into this new season, and all of a sudden they've picked up 2 quality first round picks. They're essentially the running joke was, they're the Philadelphia Bulldogs or the Georgia Eagles, whatever you want to call them. And they are looking so good on paper, and it's so hard to see how any team in the NFC/AFC, at all is going to get past them, let alone in the NFC East. So, look, I mean, I don't think any kind of fan in the NFC East is going to be looking at the Eagles games on paper thinking we're walking away 2-0. I mean, if you can split the games with the Eagles, I think as a fan, you would be so happy. And, we're going to be talking about them at playoff time, whether or not it's at the Super Bowl or they're limping into the playoffs. We just don't know, but it feels like they are going to be there at the end.
Yeah, I agree, man, 100%, Andrew. Like, they have to be the team to beat. And I think there are teams like the Cowboys, who we'll get to in the end, and the 49ers, who absolutely I think the 49ers improved their team as well, even this offseason as well. I think those two teams can go toe to toe. I did think Dallas and the 49ers, if Purdy had not gotten hurt, I thought Dallas, if Dak was Dak, if he was like a normal Dak type season, um, that I thought they could go toe to toe with the Eagles. Not that they were better, but I thought they could. They had a legitimate shot if they met the Eagles in the playoffs. That they could have beaten them. That they matched up. They had the firepower, the strength on both sides of the ball uh, to match up with the Eagles. But man, you got to look at like it's funny. They lost a few players, the Eagles, this offseason, but I didn't think it was it was the people they lost, like Chauncey. It was like Chauncey Gardner, I think one of the cornerbacks. They're perfectly deep. Even before the draft, they were still perfectly fine. They didn't need him at corner. So I've seen other people, maybe it's just Giants fans, fellow Giants fans of mine, who are like, oh, they lost this player, they lost that player. I'm like, my dudes, the players they let go were replaceable, and they're replacing with people who may be even better. You look at like what you said before in terms of like what they did with the draft. I mean, Howie Roseman, the GM is a fifth level genius. People talk about 5-degree chess. This dude's playing like 8-degree chess. And now, whenever there's like a big time free agent who's available, like DeAndre Hopkins, first thing I say is he's going to the Eagles because Roseman will make it work somehow, right? I mean, getting DeAndre Swift for a 4th round pick. I mean, come on, come on. And it's like, and you look at, it's funny. I was, at a bar with friends the first night of the draft, and some other fans were like, "Wow, at least they didn't." I think Atlanta picked right before Philadelphia, and they took Bijan Robinson, and other non-Eagles fans were like, "Well, at least they didn't get Bijan Robinson." And I was sitting there saying, "Well, they're about to take Jalen Carter, and I think that's even worse." So you look at what they did. I think people kind of forget because the Eagles' defensive line is very monstrous, and it's really strong on the inside. You got to remember too, yeah, they got Jalen Carter, who I don't know how ready he's going to be for this season. Maybe he'll be ready to go, 3-down player, for game one. I don't know. He's going to be a monster eventually. But remember, he's going to be paired up with their first round pick from last year, Jordan Davis. So you've got these two young, powerful superstars on the interior of the defensive line in the making. That's scary as heck. And they have a good pass rush on the edge as well. What they did with, they traded for DeAndre Carter. Hey, Jalen Hurts is just going to get more experience. Their offensive line was already fantastic last year. It was the best offensive line in all of football. And then you look at like this draft that they just had. Oh, last year, it's funny. It's pretty uncanny. Last year they won last year's draft, 2022. They went Jordan Davis in the first round, and then they took in the third round to Kobe Dean, who was a steal in the third round. This year, what do? In the first round, they get Jalen Carter, and then at the back end of the first round, they got Nolan Smith. So that defense, man, is going to be something for years to come. So I think that like this is how this team is actually improved, is that the minimal amount of talent, and it was some pretty good talent they let go, like that, cornerback Gardner, I believe it was. They didn't. These are replaceable pieces, and I think they're just upgrading with youthful talent. So I think this team has unfinished business. I still think they are. I know everyone's talking about the teams in the AFC because that's where the vast majority of the top tier quarterbacks are going. I think the NFC has actually got a lot of very well balanced teams. The Cowboys being one of them too. The 49ers another one, but they're headlined by the Eagles. And I still think the Eagles, in my opinion, are the team to beat in the entire NFL.
Yeah, and I mean, absolutely. And so I agree with everything you said. And it's one of those kind of funny things because we sit here and we talk about coaches being good or bad based on their results. And I mean, you can look at the Rams as a good example of, McVay sort of struggled last year and is probably going to struggle this year because, their front office went out and invested a lot of money to try and get them the Super Bowl. Now, I don't think any Rams fan out there is saying, well, we got the Super Bowl, I'm upset about it, that we're now going to struggle. But
exactly,
you look at a team like the Eagles, and what they have an amazing ability to do is get that front office into a good position where they can roll new players in. So, I mean, you mentioned, Nick Obi Dean last year as a third round pick, and then, getting 2 draft picks this year who were both, expected to go higher than they went, and being able to build their team with those kinds of players. And then once you get a coach who is, he might be a top 10, might be a top 15, to go with that front office, it just makes an amazing combination. It's like, it's so hard to beat those kinds of teams. And it's like, you might have a team who might have a great coach, they might have a great front office, but it's the teams that get both, which are really good. And as a Cowboys fan, it drives me nuts that the organization of the Philadelphia Eagles is in a fantastic position. So, I'm not happy about it, but it is what it is.
You know what? And kudos, and just to wrap up the Eagles here, kudos to them where they've got their young quarterback who's going to be around for like the next 12 years at least, franchise quarterback, already proven early in his career. And you know what? They do such a good job of doing what an NFL team should do, and that is keeping both lines, both trenches strong, and they keep replenishing that. I feel like everything else, especially when it comes to wide receivers, is replaceable. Like you can, make things work with your weapons, but when you can control the lines, and this is just what they've done in terms of bringing that young talent, it's so impressive. It's so impressive.
Before we continue on from Philadelphia, we do need to mention the fact that they, at this point, do have two Australians on their roster, so we should flag that. So
wait, and who are they? Go ahead, mention.
Jordan Mailata, their left tackle, who started life as a rugby player and then came from the international pathways. And
I didn't know he was Australian.
And he's obviously just recently, 12 months ago, signed a big new contract for them. So he's going to be there long term, which is he's a very strong young man, that guy. And then their punter, Aaron Sipos, is a Australian too. So he happened to get injured last year and then came back for the Super Bowl, I believe. So whether or not he's still there next year, we don't know. But as of right now, they have two Aussies on the roster. So I can't hate them too much.
I hear you, man. I hear you. That is definitely noteworthy. And it seems like the NFL's had more like it's had a handful of NFL punters from Australia. I know there's been, off the top of my head, I'm not remembering names, but I know there's been some others.
I think there's about 4 or 5 at the moment. So there's a organization called Pro Kick, and that started back in the 90s. So there was a guy called Darren Bennett who was a Pro Bowl punter for the Chargers back in the 90s. And back when he sort of started this organization, Pro Kick, and I'm pretty sure he was involved in some respects, and that got started, and it was basically a pathway for guys who were playing Aussie rules football to look into punting. So a lot of them have moved. So back then, when Darren Bennett started, he was an Aussie rules footballer in our official Australian league, and then made the move to the NFL. Whereas now, a lot of guys who are sort of younger are actually making that move through college. So there's a lot of guys who are Australians who go to college first and they do the 3-4 years and then move on to the NFL. So it's an amazing thing that we've sort of we've cornered the market on punters, and no one cares about punters, but I can assure you that the Australians do, because there's a fair few Aussies floating around.
I'll tell you, I love good special teams. I love a good punter, and I love a good kicker. To me, it's important. It's very painful to lose a game because a crappy punter or a crappy kicker. You need 4 seconds to go. You need that 47-yard field goal, and the guy misses. Everyone misses sometimes. I get it, but obviously some kickers are better than others, and it's painful to lose. With inconsistent kicking and punting. So I hear you, but hey, man, strong legs from Australia. You guys are pumping them out.
Well, so the big one at the moment is Michael Dixon from the Seattle Seahawks. So he's an Aussie. He's from New South Wales, so a bit north of me. But
is he the best one?
I would say he's probably the best, or one of the best punters going around at the moment. And so he's kind of an interesting story, because he's one of those sort of young guys who was sort of playing Aussie rules football a bit when he was younger, but didn't really make a sort of an impression as an AFL kind of guy, but then went into the college system, and then has been doing great things for the Seahawks ever since. So
see, there's still hope for me. All I have to do now is just get into join Aussie rules, and then maybe in a few years I can become an NFL punter, and I'll take the minimum vet contract.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move on to the New York Football Giants. Question is, how do the Giants follow up last season? And I'll lead off with this one where I'm a Giants fan myself, and I couldn't be happier with how the team addressed this offseason. They didn't go too crazy with. They had a decent amount of free agency space, and I like how they spread it out. We are on the defensive side of the ball. I feel like this team, like the Giants, my team is like the other teams in the division. They've all upgraded, at least on paper. Um, I like how they did with their free agency. With we got Bobby Okereke. We had no linebackers. We've had no linebackers for a long time, and that was one reason why our run defense was amongst the worst last year, and it was absolutely horrible. So he's not going to fix it all, but he's going to help a lot. And they got him for like $10 million a year, so that was important. Um, they also brought in some reinforcements on the defensive line, and that was key too because like our better guys like Leonard Williams, Dexter Lawrence, they were out there for like 95% of the time, and even Leonard Williams was playing like with a neck burner most of the season. So they needed some quality depth. They were able to do that via free agency. And the offensive side of the ball, we've had a few banes of our existence for a long time on the offensive side of the ball. Me myself, namely, is the offensive line. I think we did a good job. I love that. So grateful that John Michael Schmitz fell to us in the second round. I remember, when he was sitting there for us in the second round, and Lawrence Tynes, former kicker for the Giants, announced the pick. He could not say the words John Michael Schmitz for me and every other Giants fan fast enough. It was like believe me, there were grateful tears. We were crying gratefully when he made and as much as we love Deontay Banks, when we got John Michael Schmitz in the second round, trust me, we were crying with joy. We were just like, thank you, thank you. And so, um, and the wide receiver, we clearly don't have a wide receiver one, but I love the depth that they brought in. This is a team that has been riddled with injuries for a long time, including and especially at the wide receiving core. And I love the depth they brought in, namely Paris Campbell. I love what we had last year with. I'm looking forward to a full season of Isaiah Hodgins. Darius Slayton. I'm all cool with that guy being like a wide receiver 3. They brought in Paris Campbell. They brought in Jamison Crowder. They drafted Jalen Hyatt. So the Giants front office made it a point, and they clearly stated it too numerous times. They wanted to get faster. They wanted speed, more speed. This is not a speedy offense last year in terms of their receiving talent. They got a lot faster. So I think there's a lot more potential there for this team. And I think the offense is actually going to be quite different. We're going to see, they had like the fewest amount of explosive plays last year. And certainly they were amongst the lowest in terms of like 20 plus yard pass attempts. And, a lot of people blame the quarterback. I don't think that was it. And I think it was pretty clear about how the front office saw it too, that, they gave Jones the contract. They didn't see him as the problem. It was like they knew they needed more talent, and they needed more speed, guys who can stretch the field. Darren Waller was a great, low risk, high reward trade when they gave up like a third and a sixth or a fifth, whatever, and a manageable contract. And if he can stay healthy, he's going to be, he's going to make a difference. Like he opens things up for this offense. Like I don't know if how ready Hyatt is going to be this year. He is a raw product. I did love that the value in the third round, even moving up for him. I loved it. I just thought he was like kind of like the last wide receiver at that point. I think I had a third round grade on or better. And so I was happy. And the potential's there just with the speed alone. So he's going to need some time, but I think Paris Campbell is going to slide in nicely. You got Wan'Dale Robinson, who I warn Giants fans, don't expect too much from Wan'Dale Robinson, at least this year. He had a torn ACL. He's going to be on the field at some point, but it really takes the second year back to really be who you are. Sterling Shepard, you've got these guys, injury, history of injuries, and so we'll see. But just with Paris Campbell, Darren Waller, Jalen Hyatt, And I think improvement. I do think this offensive line is going to take a nice step forward. They're not going to be the elite, but they're going to take a nice step forward, and it's going to help. It's going to help everything. So I liked everything they did. I loved the draft. I loved how they managed, free agency. They brought in really, good players and good depth, and we needed it. We needed it. Okay, what do you have to say about the Giants, Mr. Cowboys fan?
Yeah, well, so it's funny actually. So if you guys haven't watched our previous two episodes, please go back and watch them, because last episode we talked about the best defensive players in the NFC East, and then the episode before, obviously Joe was on and we talked about the NFC East best offensive players. And if you look at our defensive players, then there's a lot of guys who are Giants who we talked about. So we talked about obviously Dexter Lawrence and Leonard Williams and Thibodeau, and then Bobby Okereke, who you obviously mentioned, and then Deontay Banks, who will be coming in this year as well. So their defense has always been pretty good. And I always find that, in general, NFL fans are really kind of rash in their decisions, and your best front offices are never rash. And to a certain extent, I feel that the Giants have almost gone past that point where they are like, non-rash is not a word, but sort of very cautious. And it feels to a certain extent from an outsider point of view that they really haven't given Daniel Jones an amazing platform to go through. So, a guy that the Cowboys picked up, obviously, as a wide receiver in Brandon Cooks this year, someone like that would be someone who I think would be an amazing pickup for Daniel Jones to sort of really be able to, have some kind of confidence. Because I mean, you reeled off some decent names there, but obviously there's a lot of names at wide receiver, and so it's, trying to put them in an order. It's almost the case of throwing them on the ground and seeing what happens. So
yeah,
totally. To me, as an outsider's point of view, it feels like the Giants have and we talked about it earlier, like they have a pretty good front office, and they seem to, in general, do the right things. And it at least going on last year, it feels like they've got a coach now who sort of aligns with that kind of structure. So once again, going back to what I was mentioning previously about the Philadelphia Eagles last year, it feels like the Giants are an ascending team, and it is going to be interesting once we start getting towards the end of the season, because, we're going to talk about the Cowboys a bit later, but if you start talking about Philadelphia being an ascending team and then the Giants being an ascending team, well, there's only a certain amount of spots in the NFC for the playoffs. So it is really going to be an interesting season, because you've obviously got those conference games you've got to get through. But if I was a Giants fan, I would be pretty happy, because I would feel like they have the momentum going forward, that they are improving. And I'm a guy who probably even a couple of years ago, I was quite in on Daniel Jones. I felt like, is he a top 5 quarterback? Maybe not, but is he top 10 to top 15? I feel like he is, and you can win in the NFL with that. And we're not going to get in an argument about Eli Manning tonight, but as a Romo apologist, Romo sort of always seemed to be in that position where the team that the Cowboys built around them sometimes would have great star power, but it wouldn't be having great depth. And Eli Manning was always surrounded by great depth. And that's what you kind of feel like that the Giants are focused on now, is they're focused on that quality depth and getting a quality team together rather than worrying about the names, which is, it's not what the fans want to hear. The fans don't want to hear that you're getting, name, like they want to hear you're getting names through the building. They don't want to hear that you're getting players. But I feel like, as someone who, likes to sometimes put his GM hat on, I feel like they're going the right way about it. And in a few years' time, the fans are going to be sitting there going, "Oh, wow, look at our Giants," but they're going to be forgetting about the fact that they wanted D-Hop on the roster, or they wanted, someone else. So
I'd like to listen, like the point you made before too. We clearly don't have a wide receiver one, and Waller helps out a lot if he's healthy. But it's like, I'm always wearing my GM hat. I always see things, through the prism of a GM. I can't picture myself being a player, so I have to be a GM. And so I look at, think about roster construction and what makes sense. And yeah, there are definitely people who are like, you go on Twitter. I'm always on Twitter, and people are clamoring for D-Hop, and I would definitely kick the tires on D-Hop. let's not forget this guy did a lot last year in like something like 9 games. He was fantastic, and that was a horrible situation with the Cardinals last year. But I think they're building solidly, and we're still, I don't have us as like, I have the Eagles and the Cowboys and the 49ers, Chiefs, Miami, and a few other teams as like tier 1 teams. I think the Giants I think they've improved within I think they were a tier 2 team last year, and I think they're a tier 2 team this year. But I think they've improved or leveled up within that tier, but they haven't leveled up to the tier 1 teams. We still, I think, have a little ways to go. So I like that they're building, like you said before, like the depth. I like that they're kind of like focusing on the depth right now and not like reaching for things. And Hopkins, if they can get him for, say like an and they're not gonna get him, but like if we were gonna be like, I'd be cool with that for like, say like a 2-year contract, even OBJ type money, because Hopkins, his history of injury is not like OBJ. OBJ is, his history of injury is lengthy. I'd be cool with that, but I also am like, dude, I want to make sure that this team, we've got Andrew Thomas coming up soon, contract, Xavier McKinney. I want to make sure we're keeping our young guys. And I think that's how the front office sees it. And I agree. Like, I don't want to go too crazy trade, even though we need a wide receiver one. I'd rather focus on keeping our good guys who've proven to be very, very good. They're young, and the second contract's coming up soon. But listen, I'm a Romo apologist too. Actually, I hate using that word because he was a damn good quarterback. That was a guy where it seems like those were really good Cowboy teams. Things would just go wrong at the wrong time. Like it would be Romo getting injured. And from what I recall, and correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew, just from what I recall, is that Dallas, after like maybe like 2011, like Tony Romo used to get smashed all the time. They did not have a very good offensive line. They did like in 07, when they were like, 13-3 or 14-2, whatever it was. But after that, for like the next like 5 years, their offensive line just wasn't nearly good enough. And I think I remember like Jerry Jones and the front office at that time saying, we're going to make a concerted effort to improve this offensive line. And ever since then, after Romo took years of beatings, ever since then, Dallas's offensive line has either been the best or like top 5 for a long time. So they made it a concerted effort. And unfortunately, it was a little too late for Tony Romo, though.
Yeah, and look, I don't want to, I guess as it's a Cowboy show, we can probably talk about the Cowboys a lot, but obviously we've got another
Cowboy show.
First, so
we can talk Cowboys as much as we want.
But so like it is an interesting kind of thing because you're talking about D-Hop obviously, and from my point of view, like if you look at the Darren Waller thing, to me is something that you look at and go, that's what the good teams do, is they take a guy who, he might have some injury issues, but they're not giving him a massive signing bonus, obviously, because he's coming across on an existing contract. It wasn't a massive amount. It wasn't a massive amount from draft capital. So it's a really good kind of pickup to get. Whereas you look at D-Hop, and the concern with me all along has been that he's wanted big time money for his contract. And even to a certain extent, OBJ seemed to want that as well. He seemed to sort of be ignoring the fact that, well, he did. And, he sort of ignored the fact he was coming off his injuries and whatever and thought, at one time I did this. And you look at it and go, that's what the good teams avoid. And I think the Cowboys during the Romo years, we really we didn't avoid those kinds of things. We looked for those splashy kind of pickups. And I think that shows you now that it's really a Stephen Jones team rather than a Jerry Jones team, where we're now taking a much more structured approach, which the difference between a structured approach and a big name approach is the Rams approach, where it might get you a Super Bowl, but all of a sudden a year or two afterwards you struggle. Whereas a structured approach is the Philadelphia approach, where you'll get a Super Bowl and then a few years later, all of a sudden you're still in the range of getting a Super Bowl. So I think that's, from a business point of view, I think that's what the owners and the general managers are looking for, is they're looking for that consistency. And it can be really hard in the NFL to get that.
Yeah.
But I think, I guess you look at it and go, the Cowboys, I think, have been recently listed as the highest valued sports organization out there. So we're talking higher than Manchester United, higher than all the,
I didn't know that
out there. And
I
so,
knew
yeah,
they were the
this is
highest in U.S. sports. I didn't know they were higher than even some of the
no,
soccer
so
teams.
yeah,
Like,
so this has been a
wow.
recent kind of thing. And so you look at it and go, like, from a point of view of, selling tickets, getting bums on seats, a lot of those organizations in the NFL now are trying to get that consistency happening. So that
Yeah.
means that you're going to spend that 5th round pick or 4th round pick getting, a Darren Waller in the door. You're not going to spend a $20 million, signing bonus to get a D-Hop. And, sometimes it's not what the fans want to hear, because the fans want to hear those names. But, to me,
I'll tell you.
Darren Waller's still a name, and you sit there and go, the cost to
Yeah.
get Darren Waller in the door compared to D-Hop, it's a
Yeah.
non-issue. So
I think I might have said high risk before I meant it reversed. It was Waller was low risk, high reward. Like if he doesn't work out, I think it's strictly going to be because of just not staying healthy. So it was a good move, and I agree that that's the type of move that good organizations make. Like it's not even a risk. It's not even really a roll of the dice. And another thing the Cowboys have done too, which is noticeably different from the Romo years, is that listen, they always had, even in those years, they always had like some good star talent on defense, but it was never a complete defense. And they obviously over the past few years, Dallas has done a very good job of making a complete defense, and they got a really good defensive coordinator. They've done a really good job of so they rebuilt. They're kind of like in the process of still rebuilding that offensive line, keeping that strong like they've done for a long time. But now they've got a top tier defense, and they've got talent at each level, legit talent, not just names, but depth and talent all over all at each tier. And that's what you want to do. That's what you want to do. Like it can't just be a quarterback and a handful of receivers and go. That's not how it works. And I'll say this about fans, like, and you make a lot of great points. So I agree with you, Andrew. People say they think they like big names, but really what matters is that, and it takes big names to win it takes at least some big names to win the Super Bowl, even though really Kansas City did it last year with just a handful of big names, maybe two, to be honest with you. When you win the Super Bowl, it's not going to matter how many big names you have. It's just everyone's going to seem like the greatest player of all time. When you win that, everyone on your team is going to seem like the greatest player of all time. When you win the Super Bowl, it's like just get there. It doesn't matter how you get there, and you have to have solid, good team. On both sides of the ball, you got to be good, and you have to have depth all over the place. You really, really do. But I agree with you on like all those points. Okay, so all right, let's move on to the Washington Commanders. What are the expectations for Washington? And can Sam Howell finally solve the Commanders' problem at QB? And just a friendly reminder, like I said earlier, this is a team who had played 2 or 3 different quarterbacks last year, and they still won 8-1 in the toughest division last year. I'll let you lead off with the Commanders. Thoughts on the Commanders?
yeah, look, I mean, and we've just talked about how it's amazing that NFL teams are worth so much money, even NBA teams these days. So I read something that Michael Jordan sold his stake in the Charlotte Hornets for $3 billion, which is no chump change there. And so the amount of money that these teams are worth, and then when you hear stories coming out about teams like the Washington football team / Washington Commanders, as we'll have to call them now, and the owners.
Real quick, I'm sorry. You and Coach were talking about that last week, and I agree. It should be Washington football team. I love the name, or just Washington, just Washington.
Yes, look, yeah, I mean, it's quite funny, really, because I feel like for 20 years they've been indifferent. But if I was going to lean left or right on, dislike, I feel like I dislike the Commanders because of everything's going on. And the Washington football team sort of gave you that little bit of love for them, where you kind of felt like that's, there's something about them there that you're sort of interested in, and then they go and rip that away and change it to Commanders. But to hear that you've got an owner in the sort of position who's going to sit there and he's going to say, "Oh, yeah, we're not paying this, we're not paying that." It's just kind of like frustrating when you start talking about the billions of dollars that these organizations are worth. It's frustrating to hear from I'm completely impartial when it comes to Washington. So as a Washington fan, it must make you furious when you start hearing that they're not willing to spend money on certain things. So for them to get a new owner in is probably going to be an amazing kind of thing for their fans. And
Yeah.
as you said, like when we sit there and talk about them being a middle kind of organization as far as results go,
Yep.
it's kind of amazing that they're the worst of the bunch, and it's. Well, I mean, my question to the and it's that second question we've got here, isn't it? Is Sam Howell there's this big expectation that he's going to be a starting quarterback, and back even talking about Daniel Jones, it's like, okay, well, if I was going to get someone to sign a contract now and guarantee that Sam Howell is going to be a top 5 quarterback, you wouldn't do it. And I'm not even sure you'd say top 15. And then to me, it just seems ridiculous that we're sitting there having this conversation about Washington not having at least some kind of competition outside Brissett as a quarterback when, Will Levis was sitting there for them. So to me, it's going to be an interesting question when we see Will Levis, and, it might not be this year because obviously Tannehill's in front of him. But, I mean, quarterback is such a highly rated position in the NFL. It just seems bizarre that they're going into this season expecting a 5th-round draft pick with low experience in the NFL to just take it and roll with it. And to me, it's if you have a quarterback who is top 10, top 15, then you might be something. If you don't have a quarterback who's top 15, then you're nothing. And expecting a 5th-round draft pick to be a top 15 quarterback when you don't have that knowledge of whether or not he is or isn't is a weird risk to take for me. But look, they've got a lot of good players in the organization, and now they've got a new owner, so it might invigorate them a bit. But there's so many question marks that I just can't see them getting over those top 3 teams.
You know what? Yeah, I know. And Sam Howell is a big question mark. He is. It's obvious. Washington is a team that actually has done a nice job of accumulating talent, and they've actually done. The interior defensive line is really good. It's top notch. They've actually done a sneaky good job of I think rebuilding their interior offensive line in free agency and the draft this year. But the big thing is obviously the quarterback, and I am going to defend. I'm going to take some time to just talk about Sam Howell. That I actually they should have taken. I thought they should have taken Will Levis last year. He was sitting there in the first round. They didn't have to trade up to get him. They should have taken Will Levis, and I don't think Will Levis is a lock. In the NFL, you never really know who's going to be a lock at quarterback, of course. But when he's sitting there, I would have taken him too. However, I do like Sam Howell. I have they say Sam Howell. Do I think he's necessarily going to develop into a top tier quarterback? I maybe that's going a little too far. But the thing with Sam Howell that I like a lot is that he actually had a good college career, and he was drafted 2 years ago. Going into his final college season, he was probably the top rated. He was probably the best quarterback who's expected to enter the 2022 draft before that season. So the expectations were that Sam Howell was probably going to be the best quarterback in that class. But he did not have a good final season in college. But a lot of that, and I've made this argument before, that his best weapons left the draft before they were gone. It was he had 2 very talented wide receivers. So I forgot who it was off the top of my head who went they're not making a lot of noise in the NFL, but in college football they were very, very good, and he put up a lot of good numbers with them. And then and he had 2 very good talented running backs. One of them was Michael Carter, who went to the Jets. I think the other was Javonte, who went over to Denver. So you have these top notch. They were all drafted probably somewhere within the first 4 rounds. His receivers and his running backs. That's a lot of talent to lose. It's the same thing that happened to Will Levis over at Kentucky. He lost a good amount of talent entering his final season in college. So I always liked what Howell did in college when he had weapons around him. He didn't have it in his final season at UNC. Now he's on a team that does have talent with McLaurin. I love Jahan Dotson, and I tell everyone I shouldn't talk about him too much because we have fantasy football season coming up soon. He's kind of one of my sleepers. I know he's coming up on more and more people's radar, but I love that dude. I wouldn't be surprised, as good as McLaurin is as an outside receiver, I wouldn't be surprised if Dotson gets more targets, more receptions, and even more touchdowns. Um, the guy catches everything. I absolutely love him. His thing was he was kind of injured last year. But so I just bring that up about Howell. Like, I don't think it's crazy. I thought he was a steal in the 5th round, an absolute steal. And so I just say to people, I just say to viewers that I wouldn't scoff. Keep the expectations low on Howell, but I wouldn't scoff at the idea of him being successful because I think he's got the talent. He's also a quarterback who can scramble and run too. Um, and I forgot exactly how good he is at like scrambling and running, but it's better than he's not a statue. I'll say that, and he can pick up yards with his legs when he needs to, when the offensive line is getting crashed. He is so the team. It's interesting because I do have a lot of respect for their head coach Ron Rivera. I think he's done well with in that organization. They've been mediocre, but they've also battled back from tough situations. They were like, I don't know, like 2 and like 6 at one point last year, and they wound up being like 8 and 8, something like that, when they could have folded. And been a lot of ugly situations in Washington as well. And he's kept that team, I kind of like at least living up to its talent with the quarterbacks that it's had. And I'm kind of like, I find it like interesting that they did stick with Howell. And I don't mean interesting in a bad way, but like, they're all in on this guy, at least for this season. Kind of like it reminds me of Philadelphia and Jalen Hurts. Now, Jalen Hurts had better pedigree, I'd say, than Howell, better expectations. But there were many people who were not sold on him at all. I'm thinking, like we said earlier, a lot of people thought Philadelphia should take a quarterback, a few years ago. And so the situation with Howell reminds me of Jalen Hurts. I'm not saying he's going to be Hurts, but I'm just saying I wouldn't discount Sam Howell just yet. And if he turns out in only his second year, like his first full year as a starter, second year in the NFL, that first year on the bench for the most part really could have helped him out a lot. And he could actually wind up being with, they do have weapons, and they do have, a good running back as well in Brian Robinson. And I think they picked up someone else in the draft too. He's got some talent to work with. And I'm just saying to people, don't be surprised if he's better than most of you think.
Yeah, well, I mean, from my point of view, it's one of those things. So, talking about Jalen Hurts is a good example because Jalen Hurts, like the organization wasn't sold on him. So the organization was out there trying to get Russell Wilson last year.
I can't believe last year. That's so crazy.
So it just shows you the NFL. The NFL as an entity is so horrible at understanding quarterbacks. I mean, we talk about Tom Brady all the time and how far Tom Brady fell in the draft. So, It's not to say that Sam Howell will not be a decent quarterback. For all we know, he could be the greatest quarterback of all time. But, what I'm always amazed by is the fact that the quarterback seems to be a protected species in the NFL where we can't have competition. We find so many teams who sit there and say, "Oh no, he's our guy," and you're staring like I'm a big proponent of if you're an organization and you have a top 5 pick in any draft, you get a quarterback. So if you picked a quarterback last year at number 1 and then you're at a top 5 next year, you pick another quarterback, and then whoever is the best of those quarterbacks is the guy you start. Like it just seems to be this weird thing where teams are so quick to say, this is our guy. And then for some reason, they can't have another guy in the building who will go up against that guy every week. And it's so weird because every other position in the NFL, we expect other guys to come in and compete week in, week out to be that number 1. But we're so quick to say, this is our quarterback and we won't touch anyone else. And that's what's amazed me about this Sam Howell thing is the fact that they've sat there and said, this 5th rounder who has played one game, we believe, is he's our starter. There's no one else in the discussion. Like we've got Brissett, but Brissett is our backup. And it's, to me, it's such a weird thing. It's like get Levis in the building, and Levis might not be better. And it's fine to still say, how is your starter? But get them week in, week out competing against each other, because at the end of the day, what you want to do is you want to win a Super Bowl. You shouldn't worry about this guy's feelings. If his feelings are hurt by another guy being in the building, then what does that say about the wide receiver where another guy's going to come in and take his job, or
Yeah.
a running back where you're going to say to Saquon, hey, Saquon, you're a better running back, but we're not going to pay you this money because we're going to get this guy who's not as good and pay him, a quarter of the salary. And so it's just such a weird feeling to me that we sit there and say that Sam Howell is going to be the guy, and they don't bring in anyone who they are saying is in direct competition with him. Because to me, if you are so confident in that guy, get another guy or more guys in the building to go up against him so that the cream rises to the top and you go, yes, we are absolutely confident in that guy. And that's the weird thing for me with Washington, is the fact that they picked this guy off little game tape as far as NFL is concerned and said, he is our chosen one. And, as of right now, in a packed, division that we've already talked about, like it feels like they are team 4 of 4 at the moment. So, are we really, like, would we be shocked if Washington had a top 10 pick like next year? And then all of a sudden is Sam Howell still your guy? I mean, he'd have to have a good season, but then there's still a top,
Listen, I'm with you. Like, I defend Sam Howell, like in terms of like people, like I said, I'm not making super projections for him, but people just automatically scoff at him like Sam Howell. I'm like, I'd rather roll with him than the other quarterbacks they've had for the past few years. Like, I'd rather give him a shot, I should say. But I agree with you. Like with Will Levis being there, I thought that was a bridge too far in terms of not taking him. You don't lose. What do you have to lose? You didn't move up. You didn't give up next year's first round pick. You draft in the first round. It's these rookie contracts, even for first round quarterbacks, there's only a limit. There's a limit on what they can get anyway. So you could draft another first round quarterback next year, and the year after that until you get it right. So I agree with you 100%. I thought it was crazy they didn't go with Levis, but I have to say, like that's just what makes it really, really, really interesting for me. Is like, wow, like Ron Rivera really believes, and that's got to be a Ron Rivera call. That he really believes that much in Howell that they didn't bother taking another quarterback or at least they didn't take Levis in the first round. So I just found it interesting. I'm like, wow, they really, really believe in him that much. So we will see. And I do want to say this though. They did take someone in the first round. Washington has a habit of taking players that I really like a lot, who I think maybe would be there for my team, the Giants, like in the early second round when the Giants were horrible up until last year and are always picking early in the rounds. And they've done it a few years in a row now, where a few years ago they took John Davis, linebacker, first round, I think earlier than people thought. Last 2022, they took my man, Jahan Dotson, in the first round. I thought he could be, for the Giants, like early second round. And then this year, they took one of my favorite cornerbacks in the first round, took him earlier than I thought he would go. And I thought, well, Deontay Banks will be gone by pick 25. I'd be really happy with Emmanuel Forbes. And I'm just saying, keep your eye out for Emmanuel Forbes. The dude's a ball hawk, and he knows how to play the cornerback position.
Yeah, well, and before we continue on to the most important part of this entire conversation, which we'll get to next, which is obviously the Cowboys, I guess, so the question here that we had at the start was, what are your expectations for Washington? And it really feels like, at best, we're talking about them as an 8-1 kind of realm team as of last year. Mm-hmm. I think, on paper, they might be better, but, when you say they might be better, are they,
it's a question of the Giants. I think neither of them are going to be tier 1 teams this year for me. I think they're going to compete with the Giants for third place in the division and possibly a playoff spot. I wouldn't be surprised if there are yet again 3 teams from the NFC East that make the playoffs. And I think, like, if that's true, I think that third spot's going to be between the Giants and Washington. I think, they're similar teams, similar level teams, but it comes down to the quarterback.
I mean, yeah, and I mean, like, that's why if you're asking me at the moment who's better, Sam Howell or Daniel Jones,
oh yeah,
if you came to me and said that Washington was a 5-win team next year, I wouldn't be shocked. Whereas if you said that to me about the Giants, I would probably be pretty surprised. So
yeah, and they're going to have it's going to be a tough schedule for every team, and especially for the Giants they're not leveled up like the Cowboys and the Eagles. But I think the Giants, as tough as the schedule that we all have, I think I'll roll the dice with the Giants over Washington. I agree with you. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to speak over. Was there anything else that I cut you off there?
No, let's get to the most important part.
The most important segment of the show. Dallas Cowboys. Our Dallas Cowboys. Okay. Are the Cowboys pretenders or contenders? I was going to say, should you lead off? I'm going to lead off. I'm not. You're the Cowboys fan. I'm not. I'm gonna set it up for you. I'll be real quick about it too. I think, and I'm always high on the Cowboys. For the past few seasons, I've been high on them, coming in as one of the most talented teams and one of the most well balanced teams in the entire NFL. Not just the NFC, not just our division, but the entire NFL. And this is a team that really did not have a lot of holes from an outside perspective. Did not have a lot of holes to begin with. And I know there was criticism of, I think they've done a good job of, if there any holes that they any chinks in the armor, they did a nice job of filling this off season. And, there's criticism of the pick of Mozzie Smith, at the back end of the first round. And the dude's a big time run stuffer. And I think he can potentially be a pocket penetrator. I think he's got the potential, but he's really so good. He's really, really good in run defense. And that's going to make your best player, Micah Parsons, even better, because then he can focus on doing Micah Parsons type things. That is, and he does it all, but you really want to see this dude get after the quarterback because he can do it. Like I said before, I think the Cowboys had it last year. They had the potential. They could match up with the Eagles. I do think the Eagles were better on paper, but the Cowboys, like the 49ers, I think could match up with anyone. And I think they're even more so this year. I liked the draft they had. I thought they had a sneaky, underrated or underappreciated draft by many people. I liked Mozzie Smith. I liked Schoonmaker, the tight end, who I wasn't even too familiar with until they drafted him. And then I was reading more up on him. I'm like, wow, this is actually a really nice player here. But what you did with the trades that you guys made and bringing in Gilmore for the secondary, wow. Opposite of Diggs, you get that Super Bowl playoff. You can't get more tested and comfortable in hard situations than Gilmore. This guy's been there. He's got multiple rings. I still think maybe he's not Gilmore 2018. I still think he's probably better than the vast majority of cornerbacks out there. His experience and his knowledge alone is going to make a huge difference. His intuition, his instincts, just everything he's learned, accumulated over his career, makes a huge difference. And then you've got Cooks, the wide receiver you got, who you needed because Gallup is always kind of up, he's always up in the air. You got Tolbert, who I understand is having a really good, a mini camp and OTAs, and that's cool because I was high on that guy last year, but you just don't know, because he's young, So I thought Cooks was such a huge addition. You've got your the next heir to the running back position and Pollard, who you've got on the tag, who's going to be, I think, phenomenal on this team. So I do, again, like I've said all along, I think each of these teams have leveled up. I think the Cowboys have too, without really adding kind of like the big, star player. I think they've leveled up. I think they've covered up some of their chinks in their armor, which were limited to begin with, in my opinion, and they just added nice depth and nice experience. And I think they were really, really savvy moves. And I do think, like I've thought for the past few years, and especially last year, they are contenders in 2023. They are not pretenders. Take it away, Andrew.
Yeah, look, it's a very, I spoke, I guess it's probably a good way to sort of, put a sort of a bow on the whole sort of show really is what has always been so good about the Philadelphia Eagles is they don't do the splashy picks. They do the good picks long term, and the sort of, they take a structured approach, and that's what this Cowboys offseason has all been about. It's been looking at Brandon Cooks and saying, okay, we're going to get Brandon Cooks and we're going to get him in the building. And, and then we're going to look at Stephen Gilmore and we're going to get him in the building. And, you add Cooks and you add Gilmore. And then on top of that, you get, Mozzie Smith in the building as well. And then Overshawn, who is the linebacker, he's a really interesting one from my point of view, because he was a guy who I feel like about 20 to 22, 25 teams were really interested in drafting, and he was
He's
interviewed
fast,
by pretty
and
much
he hits hard.
pretty much nearly every team. And if a lot of
too.
NFL teams are interested in interviewing you, then you must be doing something that's, piquing the interest of scouts. So I think, they made some really good kind of picks. And then the one that everyone's talking about as far as the Dallas Cowboys, internally is Eric Scott Jr., who's the cornerback, who was sixth round cornerback. And it's amazing, because if you get any information about the Cowboys at the moment, they will literally be talking about it. They'll be talking about the offense and saying about what the offense is doing, and then all of a sudden they'll just throw his name in out of nowhere. And so he's someone who's making a really big impression on the writers at the Cowboys. So, like, as you kind of said, it's not a sexy kind of off season for the Cowboys, apart from, I guess, Gilmore, and I mean, to a certain extent, Cooks, but.
And it didn't need to be.
No, and a lot of people outside the organization in general sort of look at Cooks and there's a bit of meh, but I mean, he's a guy who has regularly put up 1,000 yards. And, we were talking about Gallup before, and I think Gallup, going back to that third wide receiver is going to be in an amazing position, because he's one of those guys coming off an ACL tear, which this is his second year after the ACL tear. So, the reports on him has been, the quote was, he's springy. And so, like, there's a lot of stuff to love that's going on about the Cowboys. And I'm not even going to try and pronounce his name. Hunter Lupecki is a fullback who came in, who's kind of a do-it-all kind of player. And there's all these kind of guys who there's talk about within the Cowboys organization. And to a certain extent, it's been a really positive organizational kind of switch, because the positive vibes have been coming about these different various players, as opposed to, in the past, it's always been a talk about a splashy kind of pick they've made and how this one player is going to do this. And it's never ended well for the Cowboys, and it hasn't really ended well for a lot of organizations. So I'm pretty happy with where the Cowboys are at right now, as far as, if I feel like, if you were going to ask me, are they a better football team than they were last year, I would have to say absolutely. I think they've got a lot of guys in the building who are going to fill roles, and, whether or not those roles are starters or, they're backups or whatever, I feel like they've got the guys in the organization now who can do good things. So I think the biggest question mark is going to be on our new offensive coordinator not offensive coordinator so much, but our offensive play caller as our coach, to see whether or not he's sort of learnt from the last few years of, obviously losing his job in Green Bay and then watching the plays called by someone else, whether or not he's sort of advanced his play calling to the new sort of paradigm of offensive play calling. But I'm pretty confident of where the Cowboys are now, that they can play with a lot of teams. I mean, as you mentioned, Philadelphia is obviously the first question mark the Cowboys have to get past. And I think, the thing about Smith was, what was really interesting was the fact that Micah Parsons was in that position where, and I can't remember who it was right now, but there was a Penn State guy who was available at the Cowboys pick. And we didn't end up picking the Penn State guy, because we picked Marty Smith.
The cornerback, Joey Porter, probably. Yep.
And we picked Marzi Smith, and then it was that, one of the viral videos went around was the fact that, here's Micah Parsons banging the table for Marzi Smith. And then his comment was, Philly, no more running up the middle. And so, this was a pick looking at those, quarterback sneaks that Philadelphia was getting away with. And then, you flip over to the fact that the 49ers have really embarrassed the Cowboys from a point of view of being able to run the football at will against the Cowboys. So the Cowboys have really 49ers. The Cowboys have flipped the paradigm from being an offensive team who are going to try and put all the points on the board and then hope you can't catch them, to trying to really menace you with a strong defense. But then the flip side is they did pick up Brandon Cooks. And then, as I said, they've got, Gallup coming from an ACL. So it's going to be a really interesting sort of start of the season to see, like, they could put up some serious numbers on offense, but they could also struggle, or not struggle, but, really suffocate, offenses with their defense. So I'm pretty positive. I think they are going to be contenders. The NFC East has been that kind of that up and down thing. Like we talk about for ages that we haven't really had the same team win the division for multiple years for however long it's going on for.
Since like 2006 or something like that.
I think this year's. Yeah, and so I think this is the year that Philly does it. I think gut feeling of most of us is that Philly is going to be that top team, but you would be more shocked if the Cowboys weren't on their heels than you would be if they were sort of like, if the Cowboys are trailing sort of, 10, 11 weeks in, I think a lot of casual fans would be surprised. So, look, I think they're contenders. Come playoff time, anything can happen. And I think, you can have that argument whether or not, Dak Prescott is a top 5 quarterback, but I think they've got a lot of good players in various spots, and they're primed to at least make some kind of noise in the playoffs. And, as an organization, that's what they want. They for so long have been that kind of middle tier where they might make the playoffs and they might win a game or they might lose a game. And now they really want to be a team that makes some noise. So gut feeling says that this might be their opportunity for the first time in, a few years. But look, they've put themselves in a good position. I guess really all I can do is hope that they don't have too many injuries and they get on a roll.
I know injuries. It's usually comes down to the injuries. Even last year with Dak, like I know he came back after like 6 games or whatever, but he wasn't the same for whatever reason. He wasn't the same after that injury. And I still say, I'm not saying they necessarily would have beaten the Eagles, but I thought they really could have went head to head with them if Dak was normal Dak. He had a lot of big, he had a lot of interceptions, at least at the wrong time. And that's the thing is like, that's my biggest thing is with Dak. Like if he just has a normal Dak season, they're competing with anyone. And I do love, listen, Cooks, there's no criticism to have of Cooks. He's a proven talented commodity who's going to be your number 2, not your number 1, your number 2 wide receiver. And who knows, when Gallup comes back, maybe Cooks would even be like kind of 3 on the depth chart, but it doesn't matter. Like he's a proven number 2 wide receiver. There's you can't possibly criticize that. So the team added depth there, but like you said, they keep adding to the defense. And, so I didn't realize that Micah Parsons was pounding the table for Mozzie Smith. That's interesting. That's really cool. That's really interesting. And Overshown was someone who I knew the Giants had him in for like a top 30, what I think they referred to it as like a top 30 visit or whatever. I'm like, ooh, I wouldn't mind getting that guy in the 3rd round, because we need more linebackers. It can't just be Bobby Okereke. We need more linebackers. And he is, he's got stuff to clean up in his game. That's why he's in the 3rd round anyway. I believe they took him. But Overshown is, he's a fast dude. And when he hits really, really, really hard. And I wasn't familiar with the cornerback that you mentioned earlier. But he was out of Southern Mississippi, Eric Scott. So, all right. So that's a name to look forward to there. But listen, man, those, I think it was a understated, solid draft class that helped them. And like we said earlier, especially with Mozzie Smith, it's not sexy, but you need it. It's the same thing. Listen, interior offensive linemen aren't sexy. You need good ones. It doesn't matter. You need them. So, but when you win, and especially when you win Super Bowls, it's all sexy. It's all sexy. Even like the 53rd best player on the team, they're all sexy when you win a Super Bowl. So, but I think they are absolutely contenders, and I think along with Philadelphia, I know all the attention goes to the AFC teams because that's where most of the QB talent is. But I think that the NFC teams tend to be better balanced, and I think their quarterbacks are good enough. You mentioned Dak before. I don't think Dak is a top 5 quarterback. That's not a knock against him. There's just exceptional quarterback talent out there. Some of it's like legendary at this point, like Patrick Mahomes off the top of my head. But you don't need to be a top 5 quarterback in order to win. You just need to be good enough. You need to be a good quarterback who can do some elite things. And that is what Dak is capable. Dak kind of reminds me of Eli in a way that we mentioned Eli before, Eli Romo. And there was always debate between those two, where I think Romo was a more consistent quarterback, but Eli stayed healthy. And Eli, I've even said to Giants fans, like, so I think he's a Hall of Famer in my mind, no doubt. I love Eli, and I am tying this in with Dak. I think Eli was a really, really good quarterback who had some elite seasons, and I think Dak is like that. Like, he puts up elite numbers. I know it hasn't always worked out in crunch time, but I think he's got the talent to do it. As a quarterback, he's got the talent to do it. And you don't need to be the top 5 quarterback. You need to be a good quarterback who's surrounded by a good team. That's what Eli Manning always had. He was surrounded, when he was winning Super Bowls, he was surrounded on a good team. And that's what Dak has. And like the theme so far, with the show with Dallas is that it's not just about the stars anymore, kind of like it used to be, where you had these super exceptional pieces, name, wide receivers or defensive end or running back. No, you still got your big names and you got your star talent, but you got so much depth all over the place. And that's why I think this team, the Dallas Cowboys, can compete with everyone. Dak has to stay healthy, and if so, I think they can compete. I think they can win the division. I wouldn't be shocked if they win the division. I think they're right up there with Philadelphia. I really do. And given, like you said earlier, the track record in our division, where there hasn't been like back-to-back divisional winners, it's almost kind of like, you know what, you might as well put like bet $100 right now that the Cowboys will win the division, simply because the Eagles won it last year, and I can't see my Giants or Washington being in a position to win the division. So if I had to choose between the two, I'd actually probably go with Dallas, because I think they can compete. Plus, the track record, it's still going on until it's broken. It's still going on, where we haven't had back-to-back divisional winners.
Yeah, well, and the thing about Prescott to me, which was interesting towards the end of last year, was he sort of seemed to really start to get his running legs back, which was, it added a dimension to his game that at certain points had been sort of disappearing for almost sort of 2 years due to injuries. So, that adds something that, it's sort of similar, but obviously not the same as, what Hurts adds, which is something else that the defense has to account for. So that's going to be interesting. And then the big thing that, coach and I keep going back and forth on is Tyron Smith. So I'm a big Tyron Smith fan, and Tyron Smith is a guy who's had injuries for years on top of years on top of years, but a lot of his injuries were related to his back and or back/neck, I think. And he went into last year and he got some surgery, and it was meant to sort of fix his problems. And then all of a sudden he had this, I think it was the hamstring tore off the bone or something, which, like, was such a disappointing kind of injury, but it was something that was almost completely unrelated to his sort of previous issues. So, if you can get Tyron Smith out there and fit and healthy, and then, add Tyler Smith, who they got last year, and then, whether or not you think Biadish, their center, is an actual Pro Bowler or he's just a Pro Bowler because he plays for the Cowboys, you don't know. But then you got Zach Martin as well. I mean, they can have an exceptional offensive line, and then we've talked obviously about their wide receivers, and the thing about Tony Pollard with me, what I'm most interested in, the fact that he's pretty much already starting to take, or he did in the OTAs, was taking snaps with the first team, which means that, when you say snaps in an OTA, it's obviously not the same as kind of like, in the middle of training camp, but it's interesting enough to say that, okay, his body is getting to that point where he'll be ready to go for week 1. So I'm pretty confident that the offense will look pretty good week 1, but the flip side is, I have more confidence about the defense, because the defense is where they have invested that, draft capital, and the defense has a lot of strong kind of points about it. So it's a really interesting team, because from a Cowboys point of view, it's got, bits on both sides. So, look, I can't wait for training camp so that I can start trying to figure out how good they are, because it's been a very un-Cowboys offseason, because it's been quiet. And as a Cowboys fan, it's never quiet. I was sort of mentioning during the week. Yeah, I was mentioning during the week,
quiet's good.
I looked at the Cowboys news, and the only thing I could find was Stefan Diggs Cowboys. And that's kind of a running joke that anytime anyone gets disgruntled with their organization, all of a sudden it's like you Google their name and Cowboys and it'll be at the top of the list. Like all of a sudden they're coming to the Cowboys.
Believe me, Giants fans are clamoring for Stephon Diggs, even trading for Saquon Barkley for Stephon Diggs. And I've told them, I'm like, in theory, I'm not trading Saquon, but in theory, yeah, I'd love to have Diggs. In theory, on the Giants, we need a wide receiver one. However, I'm scared that this is the second team he's allegedly, looking to move on from. And it's Josh Allen, you have Kirk Cousins. You're going to come to the Giants if things don't work out. You're going to be looking to get out. Give me Saquon Barkley, who wants to be a Giant. I realize it's two different positions. Stephon Diggs just scares me.
Absolutely. But as a Cowboys fan,
for Giant, he would work better on the Cowboys. Giants personalities, we don't do well with personalities.
But as a Cowboys fan, if the only news going around is random people on other teams who are contracted, mind you, and there has been no discussion of trades, if that's the biggest news that's going around about the Cowboys, I'm pretty happy because that means that we must be doing something right. Because at other times
is good.
Exactly. So I'm pretty happy at this time of year to see where the Cowboys are at. There's no major injuries going on in the organization. As I said, Pollard's getting close, and then Terrence Steele, the right tackle, is still a question mark, but he's recovering. So, the Cowboys are primed for a good year. Whether or not they can put it together once the season starts, we don't know. But I'm pretty happy you couldn't tick more boxes for me as far as the preseason is concerned.
I agree with you, man. And from the outside perspective, I agree with you 100%, Andrew. And one last thing. I got to go. I got to take my son to Muay Thai. It's when I took my earphones off before and I was on mute and I was, yelling this way. I was telling my son to make sure he eats breakfast, wake up his mom. We all have to go out together. So we're going to pretty much wrap it up here. But I'll say this. I tell other people with the Giants, with the Cowboys offensive line, remember they took, is it Tyler Smith last year they took in the first round? And they were scoffing about that too. And I saw him as like a very late first rounder, probably second round. And when the Cowboys took him in the kind of like middle-ish first round, and there was kind of some scoffing about that, I'm like, if this was some other team like the Giants or, pretty much any other team that took him where they took him, I'd feel the same way. But the Cowboys have proven that they know for a long time how to identify offensive line talent, and how to develop it. So if they took that dude in the first round, I'd be okay with it. So you know what? I think we need to get going over here. So I'm going to wrap it up. One thing I got to do, Andrew, I'm gonna go crazy here. I'm gonna hit the outro or the end screen for the first time. Should I do it?
Yeah. Well, so firstly, thanks for joining us, and I hope you have a great week.
All right, everybody, have a great week. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Andrew, it's been a great job doing it with you. I'm going to hit the button. Let's see how it goes.
What's up, Title Tribe? We appreciate you watching the show. If you want to catch up on all of our college football content, make sure you subscribe to the CFB Nation by clicking their link below. Make sure you subscribe to the Toilets Titles Podcast Network by clicking our link below. And make sure to catch our other content by watching these videos to the side.